Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest, an award winning filmmaker, entrepreneur, and a life coach, no other than Mr. Roman Wyden. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Roman. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yeah. Hello, hello. Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for having me on. So glad to be on Book Review 101. Like you said, my name is Roman Wyden. I am a life coach, an entrepreneur, and a filmmaker. So that means I first learned how to make films, and then I needed to make money to make films. So I became an entrepreneur. And now that I'm getting older, I really want to make a difference and coach and help people in life, and especially families with neurodiverse children, uh, specializing in ADHD. So that's a little bit about myself. I grew up in Switzerland and now live in the United States, and I love where I live.
Mr. Roman Wyden, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Is ADHD a real medical disorder?
Great question. I get this a lot. So my movement is called ADHD is over. And it triggers a lot of people because what they think I'm saying is it does not exist. And I just want to clarify before we go into the is it a medical disorder or not, that the struggles of someone like showing behaviors of ADHD, the struggles are real. The label is what I question. Like, is it empowering or is it disempowering? In my view, it's disempowering. And here's why. So, ADHD is a psychiatric disorder and it's not a medical disorder. Now, they do say that psychiatric disorders are, under the umbrella of medical disorders, but there's a distinction. And I'm forgetting his name. I think Thomas Sass, I can't pronounce it. He was a Hungarian American psychiatrist, and he said that um, real medical disorders are discovered and psychiatric disorders are created. So there's the difference, right? So ADHD is not a real medical disorder. There are no blood tests, there's no biomarkers that are objective. It's all subjective. Like in regards to ADHD, it's observing someone's behavior and then labeling that as the symptoms and then labeling that as a disorder. So, short answer, it's not a medical disorder, it's a psychiatric disorder. And that's where it gets interesting. So, that's usually how I start.
Beautifully articulated, Mr. Roman. Very well said. What key findings from the brain imaging, like MRI or PET scans, genetics, and neurochemistry research, most convincingly demonstrate a ADHD biological basis as neurodevelopmental disorder?
Yeah, so that's wow, a lot of great points and questions here, and not enough time to really go into the depth of each. But so the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for that, basically the Bible that houses or defines all the disorders, and it's a U.S. created text, but it's used worldwide. The DSM itself, you could say it's the authority on disorders, says that brain imaging is not a way to diagnose ADHD. So if they say it, there's just not enough there because taking brain imagery, those are snapshots, right? And it's always depends on when you take a snapshot. Is the child stressed or not? Did they just eat sugar or not? Are they generally in a traumatized state? So it's not fair to take an image and say, oh, look, the brain is overly active here. That means it's ADHD. So that's just in short in regards to the imaging. Genetics. So ADHD is not genetic in a sense that if you're, it's not a determined um, genetic disorder. It's predisposed, which means if you grew up in a family where an adult also had the behavior of ADHD, it's more likely that the child does, but not because of genetics. It's because of the environment the child grows up in. And the study of epigenetics has proven that the environment actually turns on or off our genes. So our genes that we get are not necessarily turned on automatically. So it happens through the environment. So again, it's not a genetic, it's not a sure way of saying, oh, your father had ADHD, you will get ADHD. That's actually not true. So that's kind of a short version of epigenetics versus genetics in regards to ADHD. And the brain chemistry, so it's a myth, the chemical imbalance that we've all heard of. This is not just ADHD, this is also with depression. It is a term that was made up by the pharmaceutical companies, and there's actually evidence of a speaker who I remember seeing a statement where he said, "Oh, this was a pharmaceutical company's slogan to sell their product." So there was no scientific basis that there is a true chemical imbalance in the brain, and that's why you have ADHD or depression, because our brain, chemically changes every day. There's always an imbalance. It's never balanced. And one of my uh, colleagues in this movement, Dr. Thomas Armstrong, said, "Show me a chemically balanced brain." Well, you can't. What is that, right?
Well, thank you for your answer, Mr. Roman. And how has the scientific understanding of ADHD evolved from early concepts like minimal brain dysfunction to our current neurodevelopmental model?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, again, I'm not a doctor or scientist. I'm a parent who's done 9 years of research, after my own son was diagnosed with what they called ADHD, the disorder. But I will say that from my research, having gone further back and seeing how the name has changed, the approaches have changed, right? We've become more civilized in a way because we used to. Lobotomies. We used to do lobotomies. We used to drill into people's skulls, right? Thinking that that would cure sadness or depression. Um, there's shock therapy. We've done things, as a society or as a medical scientific community that we thought worked and they didn't. So I think what's happening now is we're more and more realizing, and the CDC and the Center for Disease Control, the National Institute of Mental Health, all these large institutions here in the United States that are actually dealing with ADHD and disorders like that, they are saying we just don't know enough yet, right? And I think we've been pretending for 20, 30 years that we know. Like Russell Barkley is one of the famous doctors that always says that we know science is in and here are the results and this is what it is. We can't do that because things change. But to answer your question is that we've made a lot of progress, but it's more in the direction of realizing, oh, it's not really a thing in our brain that causes all these problems. It's more of a behavioral uh, disorder, and therefore what's making someone behave that way? Oh, we have to look at the stress and trauma and the environment. So to me, that's progress. Scientifically, I think we've realized we don't have any medical tests to diagnose ADHD. And that's, to me, also, finally, we can admit that and say, well, we need to stay open minded and continue, because science needs to continue being open, right, to learn and to change its opinion as well.
Indeed, there is a development. How does the significant measurable effectiveness of evidence based treatments like stimulant or medication and behavioral therapy?
So medications, again, it's a longer subject, but medications work in order to focus someone, to get someone so super present in the moment. Because you have to remember, Adderall, for example, the stimulant, is basically speed, right? It's like, forget John Gray, the author John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, once told me that the difference between Adderall and speed is only the amount that you take. So, in other words, your pharmacist and your drug dealer are only separated by the amount of what you're taking, but you're taking the same substance, right? So ADHD medications actually are not really just for ADHD, meaning any human being that will take Adderall will experience that effect, which is also another way of saying, well, it's not really an ADHD medication. It's something that causes us to be so present and productive, right? So you could say that's a good thing. Now, I don't want to talk about side effects because there's a lot of side effects that we've seen kids and or adults get ill, or some have died. There's been suicide, depression, there's side effects. And for some people it works. So I'm not anti-medication, but I will say that medication should never be the first first action. It's a band-aid, and while we have a band-aid, we should heal the deeper wounds, is my opinion. And Dr. Gabor Mate, who wrote Scattered, my favorite book on ADHD, says the same thing, right? It's a band-aid. And also, most of the experts on ADHD who promote medications usually have some ties to pharmaceutical companies, and you can look this up on Wikipedia. It's not hidden knowledge. So I will say medication as a last resort. As for emergency situation, Western medications are great, but ADHD is not an emergency.
Medication indeed. Beyond symptoms, Mr. Roman, how do you assess the functional impairment across multiple life domains like work, home, or social that is central to diagnosing ADHD as a disorder?
Yeah, it's interesting. Often I hear parents say that, well, it's really only at school where my child has a hard time, you know, behaving or focusing. So they often stop medications on the weekend or during holidays or right time off from school. And again, a lot of children who've finished school right after college have suddenly reported that they have less ADHD symptoms. Well, that's interesting. So, not to say school is the only factor in triggering these ADHD behaviors, but certainly I think when we put someone in an environment that's not ideal for them and we add stress and expectations and pressure, then we see these kind of symptoms, right? So they can show up at work too, right? If an adult is at a job that he or she doesn't like, and there's a lot of pressure and expectation, and you know, uh, they may get distracted. They may fall into their ADHD behavior, which is procrastination, can't focus. They just don't want to be there, and they just can't pay attention. So it can be across all the areas of life or only one or two, or it depends on the individual. But I would say most likely those symptoms only show up in environments where there's stress and pressure, and perhaps not an environment where the person feels safe or wants to be there.
Mr. Roman, how do you distinguish ADHD from condition with overlapping symptoms like anxiety, trauma, or sleep disorders, or environmental factors like stress, digital overload during coaching assessments?
So when I coach people, it's interesting because most of the time parents will reach out and say, "Hey, we have a child that has ADHD. Can you help us?" The answer is yes, I can, if I'm the right coach for you. So I do an assessment. But usually what happens is I end up working with the parents for most of the time, because and some people will argue that's not true and you can do things with a child. Yes, but I'm not a tips and tricks kind of coach. So for example, somebody, excuse me, a client said, well, I lose my keys all the time. And I said, look, I can teach you how to not lose your keys in like 2 minutes. But that's not really what I do. What I do is I go deeper. I go into the you could say into the traumas and the stresses of the family, right? We look at the parents, like how are they as parents? How's the home environment? Are the parents perhaps alcoholic? Are there drugs? Is there a lot of stress, money issues, things that could really trigger those behaviors in a child, right? And so when I assess them, it's really more about, like I always say, my first question is like, what's not working for you in life, right? And it's interesting because people come to me, they're like, oh, my ADHD and I can't at work. And I say, what's not working? And usually it'll be something where I say, oh, we can take care of that. But really, what's not working? right? Like, let's go deeper. And usually it's like, I hate my job, or um, I don't think I'm good enough, or I have my marriage is falling apart. There's bigger issues that sort of trigger those symptoms. And when you lose your keys or you can't focus at work, those are really just the surface symptoms that we see. But there's a much deeper, there's a well of, like you said, environmental stressors, there's traumas, there's and part of your question was like, how do you distinguish, right?
Yes.
ADHD. So, for example, I was interviewing Peter Levine, who's one of the biggest trauma experts in the world, and he gave me a diagram, and this is online, and the symptoms of childhood trauma overlap with the symptoms of ADHD by 90%. So the moment I saw that, it was something was clear to me. It was like, okay, so is it childhood trauma or is it ADHD? And the only way you can distinguish it is by the definition in the DSM, meaning how a disorder is defined is the only way where you could say, oh, this is more like ADHD, or oh, that's more childhood trauma. But I believe it's the same thing. It's always the same thing, whether it's depression. I even believe autism. There's different sensitivities to stress in the world, right? Autism is a higher one. There's a whole spectrum. ADHD can be high, but it can be low for most people. So it's really, to me, it all boils down to the human being that was stressed or traumatized. Doesn't have to be trauma, could be stress over time, and whose system, the nervous system, is stuck in a defensive mode. And so then my job as a coach is to calm down the nervous system of the parents, the family, and then the child follows. Automatically the child is calmer when the parents are calmer. I know that was a long answer, but that's kind of where that goes.
Very well said, Mr. Roman. Very well said. Beautifully articulated. An award winning filmmaker, entrepreneur, and a life coach, what are your short term and long term goals?
Great question. I love that. My short term goals are to expand my practice more into life coaching than just ADHD or relationship coaching, because that's how I started. My long term goal is really to make this movement, ADHD is over, a known movement, such that we can maybe get the ADHD taken out of the DSM so that it's no longer a disorder. The veterans did that with the PTSD, with the post traumatic stress disorder. They, when you ask them, do you have PTSD? They say, no, I have PTS, meaning I don't have a disorder. I just have post traumatic stress, right? The effect of stress. My goal would be the same if we could rename it just something that doesn't say it's a disorder, just like it's a challenge. I'm struggling with some behavior, and I'm working on it, right? So that's my long-term goal: is ADHD is over. We can look back, 50 years from now when I'm dead, and somebody will say, you know what, maybe he was right. Maybe there never really was an ADHD. It's just traumatized human beings that needed to heal themselves. So that's my long-term goal.
Good luck for your goals, Mr. Roman, and looking forward for more success. What would be your piece of advice for those people out there? One, to be a life coach like you, to be an entrepreneur, as well as a filmmaker.
Yeah, just do it. I've always been somebody, and I tell this to my two boys. I have two boys, 13 and 16, and I always say, look, for a longest time, and still sometimes, I don't really know what I want, but I always know what I don't want. So, in other words, never settle for less, meaning if you're somewhere and you realize this isn't really it, don't get comfortable, don't stay there, stay hungry, keep searching for what it is that you want to do, and it will find you. So, start literally saying no to things that don't inspire you and say yes to the things that inspire you. Follow your highest excitement.
Yes, people, just do it and stop procrastinating. If you have a talent, please share to the world. And Mr. Roman, can you please recommend a book that influenced your journey?
Yes, the book Scattered by Gabor Mate that I mentioned earlier is a book that really changed my point of view on ADHD, because, like, I am now sort of a disciple of Dr. Gabor Mate, which also, again, shows that the struggle is real. Does the label have to be? And Gabor Mate really talks about this trauma that marks us for life, and it's a gift, right? Trauma is a gift because it brings growth. When we heal it, when we process and heal our traumas, we grow from that. So that's a book that I highly recommend. How Attention Deficit Disorder Originates and What You Can Do About It. A very practical book.
Thank you for your recommended book, Mr. Roman. And what are the tangible risks when individuals with significant ADHD impairment are told it is not real or don't receive support?
You know, I said this recently, and it's a roundabout way of getting to the answer to the question is that no one can stigmatize you unless you first stigmatize yourself. Meaning, unless you first say to yourself, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, no one else can do that. If you say to yourself, oh, I have some challenges in life, um, I'm going to start, getting a coach or working on it or going to see a psychologist or behavioral therapy, whatever you choose to do, that is your work. And there's no need to label that and say there's something wrong with me. And I feel like when people can't get services, usually, I always say in life in general, where there's a will, there's a way. You will get what you need if you're going about it the right way. And I think complaining or feeling like a victim or any of that to me never works. And so I've never actually met somebody who said, oh, I can't get the help I need, or people continue to call me lazy or make fun of me. I just haven't, because the people I've met mostly are the ones that are like, I'm not letting that define me. That's not who I am. That's just a label. And therefore, I I've got what I need. I'm doing what I need to do to heal this, right? So, yeah.
Mr. Roman, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and of course my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in its fifth season as well. Geography 101 in its fourth season, and my baby podcast, Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in fourth season, as well as my movie 101 review and music 101, Science 101, and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Mr. Roman, what specific training or credential do ADHD coaches need to ethically support clients regarding a complex neurobiological condition, distinguishing it from a general life coaching?
That's a great question. So, there are courses out there that one can take. They're usually not certifications, but there's many experts that will do a weekend course or an online course on ADHD or mental disorders. And so, just like a life coach, there are certifications, but there is not much in terms of specifically for ADHD as a life coach. So, I think somebody like myself who has experience with a child or who's been around, for 5, 10 years around the condition, um, in my opinion, qualifies to be a coach, not a therapist or doctor, of course. But really, I have a certification in conscious parenting. So I came to this whole thing as a parenting coach, if you will, because again, it's all connected, in my opinion. So I think it just helps to have a life coaching certificate or conscious parenting or, family coaching, life coaching. There's many of them out there, but I always go by, in my opinion, by the people when I meet them. Do I trust them? Do they feel like, does it resonate? Right? Does my intuition say yes to this person or no? So, yeah, have to be discerning.
Discerning indeed, Mr. Roman Wyden. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy as well as your business itself?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can go to www, still say it, ADHDisover.com. You can download a free ADHD diagnosis survival guide and look out for ADHD's Over, the book coming out in July of this year.
You're most welcome to come back, Mr. Roman, and let's talk about the book itself and let's promote to the world. Will you be my guest on Movie 101 review? And let's talk about your movies or your films that you did.
Great. Would love to.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Roman Wyden because if you support him, more and more and more empowering books to come, more and more empowering coaching to come. Mr. Roman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. My pleasure.
More to come, people. See you soon.